All right, I believe we are recording now, so that is great. Prime Minister, then, without further ado, you may begin the case for government. Hear, hear.
All right, I'll just to like note that I'd prefer if speech timing was possible. So I'll just wait for you to start it and then
Yeah, just give me a second. Let me set it up. Alrighty then. Whenever you are ready, you may begin your speech. Prime Minister, are you speaking? Because I can't hear you. I hope that's not a connection issue on my end.
No, I wasn't speaking. Am I clearly audible now?
Yeah, you're clearly audible. You're clearly audible.
All right. Three, two, one. This debate is not about the justifications on the grounds of whether or not rehabilitation in and of itself as a construct is a justified tool, because state coerces you to stay in certain rooms, to literally instrumentalize you, to listen to positive rhetorics or something like that. We believe that for this debate to occur, we all need to concede the fact that rehabilitation in and of itself is a net positive utility that we should all vouch for. The mechanisms that already exist, state-based rehabilitation mechanisms, or all other rhetorical narrative mechanisms that exist in status quo, in and of itself are coercive to an extent as well, because they require the individuals to come together in a room and listen to whatever they say. But what we do need to recognize is, regardless of this coercion thing being a wash or mutually exclusive thing, we just need to justify better coercive mechanisms. We believe our model is pretty clear. We recognize that as a state, we have individuals, but not all individuals are religious. Not all of them feel religious sentiment. For them, it's absolutely okay to entirely opt out of this mechanism to exist. We think this mechanism can simply exist through the general narrative, such as just building some sort of small mosque or some sort of priest mechanism where they can literally have regular discussions within the prison area, so that it's accessible to the people. So it's an opt-in mechanism. It's not that coercive. But even if that's coercive, justified based on that positive utility. Was I not audible, Mahathir?
I could not hear you for the last 15 to 20 seconds. Sorry, I'm sorry. I can hear him now.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I could hear the speaker perfectly fine.
Was I audible to the judge as well?
Yeah, I could hear you fine. I was following you perfectly fine.
So what was the last thing that Mahathir?
Let me just confirm. Can you hear the speaker right now?
Yeah, I can hear him right now. It's fine if he continues from here. There's no problem.
All right. That's fine. The last thing I heard you say was that you just finished the sentence that you could maybe have mosques or congregations where people can discuss about that, and you were about to continue from there.
Wait, sorry. All right, I'm audible, I guess. So I'm just starting from there. 3, 2, 1. So it's then clearly opt-in mechanism that exists for all the individuals. Right? So why do we think it's just a natural, rational extension of what the state already allows in the status quo? Status quo has literally, on a large spectrum, generally has the possibility, basically the mechanism of state-based rhetorical rehabilitation, right? It tells you that state is the one you should listen to or something like that. For state to work properly, we need to be together, brotherhood, blah, blah, blah. We think all of these rhetorics are some of like more or less existent within the religious spectrum as well. We believe in that instance, if we can assume, and it's a literal assumption that in certain instances, a lot of people love the religion more than state because of the inherent relatability or because of the inherent ideological influence that they already have. For these individuals to be much more efficacy or much more be efficiently rehabilitated, we think we can essentially use this influence or use this proximity in a way that's essentially beneficial for the state at large. We think if we have this mechanism, it's beneficial for those individuals as well. So understand that it's just an extension of what we already along the status quo. Second, why does the status quo suck? And why does having this option essentially develop better chances? In the status quo, what we do need to recognize is for certain criminals, when they essentially enter the prison system, what they already have is they generally, due to the immense amount of stigma that they initially face, that they'll probably not get jobs or something like that, they essentially, their utmost visual response becomes essentially tying back to the individuals that essentially approach them first. In most cases, it are the individuals that are essentially gangs who want members to exist. We think these are the loopholes that already exist in status quo, and the reason they exist is because of the failability of the model that status quo allows. That's to say, in the status quo, what we already allow is we don't have enough funding for the state-served counseling mechanisms to exist. That is to say, even in the United States, like there are certain states where the like 51% of the counties do not even have psychiatrists, right? So you can understand the level on the margin of the accessibility for prisoners to get access to counseling, even though they need them the most. We think in alternatively, we can literally essentially get better or at least more counseling on the number basis through the religious spectrums that exist. Because we think a significant portion of these criminals are proximal to the religious rhetoric, because more of them, like 95% of the people on the global planet are born religious, something like that, right? So we think the people that are priests and hujurs, all of these individuals are very proximal to them. Getting certain validations from them, we on a week-to-week basis is immensely important to them. If it is immensely important for them, and if we can allow better religious storytelling from these people, and these are the storytelling that are much more relatable to them because these are the rhetoric they have related to on a certain basis by praying salat or something like that on a 50 years of their life. But second, the rhetoric such as Allah would have wanted you to move on as well. These are the optimistic rhetorics that are very, very influential for these individuals to exist. On the contrary, we think that counseling, even at best, we've already proven it's inaccessible, that already exists, are futile, right? Because it's very hard to, again, find good psychiatrists, right? So we think that in the status quo, all the alternatives fail. But on a more like sophisticated level, what you need to recognize is the advocacy or the political capital to make sure that better psychiatric system exists within those prisons is very less as well, because of the hard-on crime image that the politicians want to essentially face or want to keep. These are the reasons, these are the rehabilitation mechanisms that are not developed in the status quo. The point in time, we think actually we can at least have these mechanisms even in the disguise of the religious spectrum. It's an absolute utility. We are all okay with it. But in the status quo, we need to recognize that the coercion mechanism that we're telling you is justified because it combats the stigma. We need to recognize the stigma that exists, and we need to recognize how these individuals, when they enter the prison for the first time of their life, they can never really relate to certain instances, because all of those instances, even at best or even at best case scenario, good counseling, which comes once in a year, these individuals were very like surface level and not engaging to every source of individuals that exist. But priests and hujus are essentially the ones who will listen to your stories on an emotive manner. And these are people who can now relate to you on a better manner. Under Yours of the House, they relate to certain individuals. We've already proven to you probabilistically more likely to be gangs, because these are the ones who are probably going to smile at their jokes or something like that because of their own selfish interest. And what happens that even at the best case scenario, even if they do not essentially join the gangs, we think they have no one to relate their stories with. What happens that even in the best case scenario, even if they get 5 years of jail time, they probably are the ones who are not getting essentially rehabilitated, because rehabilitation still means you probably have better instigation of the idea that you should not commit crimes. We think these are the instigations that are still available under Ask the House, where you can probably tell them that God would have wanted you to move on as well. God would have wanted you to be a better member of the society as well. For all these reasons, we believe that religion being an absolute, relatability mechanism that exists in the status quo, and a lot of people like relate to it. If they can only relate to it, if they have some sort of positive, optimistic influence that are proven to you, why not use it for the good for everyone? Very proud.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I would now like to invite the leader of the opposition to begin the case for side opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Just give me 5 seconds. Okay, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we think that the government here is trying to clearly squirrel the debate by taking a really soft stance by saying, oh, look, we're going to give people who are atheists the opt-out mechanism and say that you're not forced to attend these kind of groups in the first place. And the people who are religious will have the choice of opting into this mechanism. And therefore, this is all going to be successful. However, we don't see the impacts that they're trying to bring if these people who are opting into these rehabilitation groups are religious in the first place. Because since they already have co-opted into a religion and have faith in a particular religion or God, we don't see how the kind of huge impacts that government is trying to bring do exist. Now, let me try to counter-characterize and show how this would actually look like and how it should be. Firstly, the rehabilitation would look like the government mandating that, look, all religious leaders have to go to these prisons and try to educate as much of the crowd as they can about their religions and try to rehabilitate them by using these teachings as a metric for deciding how their lives should be later. Now, how do we think this? Why do we think this becomes problematic? Firstly, let me show you how these criminals do look like. Since they have lived in isolation from their families and their friends, they are mentally vulnerable and they have a lack of people that they were initially close to and are looked down upon the whole society. And we think since that's the case, they do look for acceptability and have more relatability with a person that lives in the prison next to them, since they're both ostracized generally, rather than a religious leader who comes and says, I'm going to save you and be everything for you. And all you have to do is opt into my religion. Now, what are the incentives of these religious figures in the first place? Their incentives are to gain more and more followers. Their incentive isn't, the first incentive is not to objectively benefit that particular prisoner, but rather ensure that this person stays a follower of that religion in the longer run. And we think since they have this incentive, they will spend the money and the resources on being able to not just provide biased counseling, which we think opposition just tries to say, oh, look, counseling would be great, but also will try to push more and more strong ideas about their religion and scriptures just to make sure that these people become devout supporters of this religion and therefore will less likely be in the objective interest of these prisoners in the first place. Now, where do we think this goes wrong? The opposition comes here and tells us, oh, look, people can be people will be able to have discussions and be able to build mosques in the prison, let's say. We think these people can have these discussions in status quo also, where they can collectivize on the basis of the religion amongst fellow prisoners. And we don't think the opening government can bring this as a constructive in the first place. Then on the point of saying, oh, look, there are some people who love religion more than state, and therefore this religion can be used as an incentive for them to make better people. However, we think this strong faith towards religion more than the state is the very fact that can be manipulated by these religious figures that the government cannot control and can be used against the very state itself. And we think this is fundamentally wrong, and which is why this faith-based rehabilitation should not take place at all. Next, on the point of saying how there will be better counseling and somehow like their lives would change. The government didn't give us any mechanization on as to how this is going to take place in the first place. Why do these religious leaders have the incentive of giving them objective counseling rather than a biased counseling, which would just make them strongly believe in the religion, and also try to like focus on how like they haven't mechanized at all as to who is the person who's paying for this in the first place. Now, why do we think this becomes problematic? Firstly, on the point of how it looks like in majoritarian governments. Since in majoritarian governments there's one majority religion, we think it's very strongly plausible that this government would support the majority religion to be the ones that go to these prisons and give them more power and more freedom to be able to preach their own religions. And we think this defeats the basic principle of secularism in such democracies, and also takes away the consent of people from other religions who still have to listen to the teachings and scriptures about another religion that they didn't opt in the first place. Second, on the point of saying how, like, if there are more than one religion that is allowed to, let's say, preach about themselves, we think there would be some sort of aggression with which these religious figures would try to push their religion, as they're highly incentivized to push more stronger and more radical ideas related to their religion, just to be able to convince and say, look, ours is a religion that you should opt into. And we think this leads to a huge amount of gap between the prisoners themselves, since you're taking away a common ground that they used to collectivize on and strengthening the gaps between them on the basis of the religion that they choose to opt into. And not only that, this gap also leads to a minor possibility of there being clashes between the prisoners, and we think that's objectively bad for the prisoners in the longer run also. Next, on the point of how we're taking away the resources from skill-based rehabilitation and forcing it on religion-based rehabilitation, and why that's bad. Like, opposition can't come here and tell us that, oh, look, we're going to give them a sense of community, like these religions will show them acceptance and employment later on. We think this is not possible, because if these religious religions were to give them employment outside after they're out of the prisons, we think they're very less likely to do so, because the people who were outside the prisons already would feel uncomfortable being around a next convict, as they generally do, since they're not comfortable with the past that these people have had. We think since a majority of their supporters are from outside, I won't take any POIs now. Since the majority religions are from when a majority of the followers are people outside the prisons, they're more likely to cater to them and be like, okay, fine, we'll not give these prisoners as important roles or spend as much amount of time once they're out of the prisons in the first place. Therefore, what we're not only doing is denying them the job opportunities later, because we're not focusing on developing the skills now, but also pushing them more towards a religious bias and more radicalization, rather than focusing our attention on giving them skills and giving them the opportunities, which we think is better possible on our side when the state funds spends its resources on developing skills that they would really need once they go outside and would have to survive for themselves. Like, the opposition needs to show us as to why these religious leaders would ever have the incentive to look in the objective interest of these people, since their main bias or main reason for going into these prisons and getting more followers is just for the basis of gaining their stronghold and gaining the amount of strength with which these people follow these religions and are devout devotees. Thus, very, very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for side government. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, yes, you're audible. Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get my papers. Okay. Yeah, I'll be starting in. Oh, right, for POIs. I'll take a POI from closing opposition in the 5th minute. CO, is that okay? I'll stop and I'll ask for it from CO in the 5th minute. Just be ready and that will be good. Okay. Right. 3, 2, 1. In my speech, I'll do one very simple thing. I'll explain to you what the process of rehabilitation actually looks like and why faith-based rehabilitation is a really good tool to actually adhere to a lot of the tenets of that process. And before I get into that, which will be a big thing, let's try to go into responses. First, I think they challenge our stance on the debate by saying, look, this motion is really not useful because what are people who are already religious? Like, these preachers really wouldn't do anything to them. We fundamentally disagree. We believe that people who have committed crimes, and for the vast majority of inmates in prisons, these are people who identify as Christians or Muslims, but they are not, in essence, for the majority of them, practicing Christians or practicing Muslims. Because if they were following the tenets of those religions, they would like go into that idea of hellfire and the fact that it's the same, and would probably not try to do it. So for the people who are identifying as a Muslim or a Christian, why is this good? This is good because practicing your religion is different. Being guided by a preacher is different. You're likely to buy into the narrative of these preachers because now they will ask you and retell you the stories you heard growing up, and will tell you, look, Noah did this when he was faced with adversity. You did this action. Your sinful action was bad, whereas Noah was in the same position and he did something better. How does that make you feel? Do you think you are living up to your example as a good Muslim or a good Christian or a good religious follower? This makes them really examine their faith and reflect on the actions they have taken in the idea that they are a Muslim or they are a Christian. This is in fact better for our case, because if most people are already religious, they're already 1 foot in the door for this rehabilitation to be effective, because now it's an invitation for them to question their actions and want to be better. What this leads to is people like having repeated conversations with these preachers and actually going about their lives, understanding what's wrong with them and trying to do best behavior to correct for it. This looks like them being put in early release for good behavior because they're doing more community service in their parts in the prison. It looks like them coming out of those prisons and trying to learn life skills in like medial, like blue collar jobs, allowing them to live a humble life and the glorification of a humble life, which will lead them to have less recidivism and less like prison returns, which is better under our world. The second criticism on their line is that, look, these preachers have an incentive to be biased and they're likely to be extremist. One, if they have an incentive for followers, why is that bad? Because presumably these preachers want these followers out of bars and into their churches, because that's where the donations are. That's where they get to extend their reach and their influence. So these preachers have an active incentive to include them into their communities. And this is important because, as the PM tells you, primary reason, and as the LO acknowledges, the primary reason for why these people recommit offenses is because they are isolated, is because they don't have a community. We tell you these preachers have an incentive to give them a community from their own selfish needs, so that's better. But what about the ideas of biased counseling or like promoting extremism? Here's the thing, right? We don't believe this idea in the slightest, because one, if you are providing biased counseling to the idea where you're trying to force them to go to jihad, you are not probably the official like religious like counselor or the preacher, as the motion states in these places, because the majority state or the government would not put a preacher in place who is super extremist or super terrible. But secondarily, on a more selfish reason, if you are conducting these sessions, you don't want to be extremist, you don't want to scare potential followers away, you are likely to make it open up and try to engage more people, which will lead to more followers. Two reasons why they will include them into their communities. Because one, the context of religion right now is that it needs more followers, it needs more people, because right now atheism is on the rise. But secondarily, preachers would do this because they want to seem more compassionate, they want to seem more saint-like, because that's their image, right? So preachers would vow firsthand for why these reformed prison inmates who come out of the cells are better people to be in with in your church communities or your groups. Finally, their final complaint is on like majority religions and secularism being hurt. Our PM already tells you why this debate cannot be on this ideal ground of never like giving up secularism. The government gives up secularism in certain instances where there are debates between right to religious expression versus right to freedom of movement. The fact that we can have like mosques and ajans in Bangladesh, even though it hurts the religious freedom of Hindus in our place, is something where we hurt like secularism, but because it has a greater good for a greater number of people, we are okay with it. In this very spectrum, we believe this is better, because not only does this allow for better rehabilitation for a larger amount of people, but it allows for existing forms of rehabilitative therapy to be better, because it is now applied more selectively to people who actually need it. So in the current status quo in the opposition's world, everybody gets cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. Under our world, some people who actually need CBT get CBT from more licensed and more practiced like psychiatrists, which means that because we've driven down the demand of like normal psychiatry, we can afford better psychiatry, which means not only are we introducing more people to rehabilitation, but we are making rehabilitation better on net through every one of its approaches. I'll take the POI from CO, if you have one.
I have a question. Is your whole case exclusive? Because I don't see it, because there are already an option for every criminal to go out and learn about the religion in status quo as well, and I don't think it is very costly that state needs to subsidize it or have any structure over it.
Okay. Right, but here's the thing, you need to have a preacher, you need to have the mosques and buildings that we talk about. So yes, there's some amount of investment, and it's comparatively much less investment than hiring psychiatrists and giving every patient like treatment every day. But moving in, what does rehabilitation look like and why are we doing it better? Rehabilitation requires introspection, and we believe religion is a great gateway to introspection because it invites people to approach religion personally. This is important because introspection makes or breaks the effectiveness of rehabilitation. Because if I don't gain an understanding of how my life got here and what I can do from here, if I don't have a pathway to rebuild myself, I do not buy into the flowery words of the psychiatrist or the prison warden, right? We believe rehabilitation needs three main things: comprehensibility, actionability, and guidance. We believe religion gives all three. On comprehensibility, we believe Bible and the Quran are something that you grew up with and something that you understand. On actionability, being able to live the moral code of the Quran or the Bible is much easier than living by Kantian ethics or Nietzschean ethics. We believe this is something that's more accessible. On the final level, we believe divine guidance is better because it's an easy way to convince people that God is watching over you and will help you make the right decisions. In the case where you don't, God will forgive you and you can move on. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Speaker, for that speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the case for opposition and conclude opening half. Here.
Yeah, I'll be starting in 20 seconds. Just a minute. Sorry for the delay. I need to get my water bottle.
Yeah, no worries. Just like indicate to me when you're starting so I can start the timer for you.
Yeah, am I audible? Starting off. Cool. So I prefer taking POIs through the chat box and not through vocal permission. Having said that, starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, two things in my speech, or probably three things in my speech. First, I'll talk to you about the content that we get from the second speaker from side OG, and then deal with the entire case that we get from side OG in a broad manner, and then talk to you about what we bring to you in this debate, right? Let's look at what the second speaker from side OG had to tell, right? We think there were unanalyzed points that come from the second speaker. What he tells you, like what he brings to you, is a case of generalization, right? We tell you that when he comes out and tells you that people who've done crimes are not true believers of a religion, they're not people who subscribe into religion in a proper way, we think it's a completely insensitive case that they run, right? Because we tell you the propensity of a person doing a crime is not directly, or it does not have any direct correlation to the they do not have any direct correlation to the kind of religion that they subscribe into, right? We tell you that doing a crime or not doing a crime has a direct correlation to the kind of lived experiences you have from the it has a relation to the kind of experiences you have. It has a relation to the kind of environment you live in, the kind of job you do, the kind of pay you get, and all the other socio-economic factors, and not simply on the basis of whether or not you believe in a particular religion. We think it's highly insensitive to get from them that people who do crimes are not true believers of religion in the first place. Hence the rebuttal to what Risha said in her first speech doesn't stand at all and shouldn't even be considered, right? But when they tell you that once they learn these teachings, they will lead good lives, they tell you like this religious rehabilitation is all the more important because in the absence of communities, these people have a greater propensity of recommitting crimes. Panel, like this might be true, but we tell you this is false on a larger scale, right? Analyze as to why people have the chance or have the propensity of recommitting crimes in the first place. We tell you it is false if they tell you it's only because of the absence of community. We tell you it's because of absence of opportunities. The time they, once they get out of jail, right? We tell you these people do not go out as skilled people who can be employed, who can be employed or who can be reintegrated into society. It is at that point that these people have greater propensity of recommitting crimes. And at this point, we tell you the point that Risha brings out in terms of how, like, since states have to fund this religious rehabilitation also, Risha has necessarily talked to you about how this will lead to a diversion of funds, efforts, and time towards these faith-based rehabilitation, and like the amount of concentration or the amount of efforts that go into skill-based rehabilitation will be much lesser. And we tell you at that point, the kind of skills that these people can acquire and then go out of these prisons, and the chances of them being employed and the chance of them not recommitting a crime are much lesser inside government's case. In our paradigm, where we tell you that all these resources, the time, the funding can be diverted into other things, we tell you that these people get out of prisons in a much better form. Having debunked second speaker's speech, let's look at what we get from side OG as a whole, right? And why they fall out of the debate, right? What they tell you is all other forms of rehabilitations are also coercive. Hence, it is fine for their model also to be coercive. First, they don't tell you what the other forms of rehabilitation look like and why they are coercive, right? But on a secondary note, we tell you when they make this about people having this opt-in or opt-out mechanism, we tell you that's not how the criminal justice system works, right? Each and every prisoner who is in a prison is mandated to go into rehabilitation, is mandated to take up such things. It is not an opt-in or opt-out mechanism that these people have. And we tell you that this comes out of sheer lack of understanding of how the CGS works in the first place, right? Like, let's take them at the best and consider that these people have the ability to choose, right? We tell you that oftentimes these prisons are hostile places where these people are forced into the kind of options that these jail authorities provide in the first place, right? We tell you these are hostile environments where these prisoners are looked down upon, and these jail authorities force them into taking a certain choice. And we tell you this is not completely non-coercive, or the opt-in or opt-out mechanism that they seem to give you doesn't exist on their side, right? And we tell you, like, they give you absolutely no response when Risha comes and talks to you about how this is extremely problematic in majoritarian states, right? Because one question that they haven't answered throughout the two speeches that we get from side OG is who funds this rehabilitation. Though it is faith-based rehabilitation, we tell you at the end of the day, it has to be funded or supported by the state, right? At this point, it becomes absolutely critical for you to think whether majoritarian states will have any incentive to go ahead and support minority religions, right? We tell you that even in the best case, to a certain extent, the majoritarian narrative that exists around faith or around religion will be reinforced and reinstated in these religions. And we tell you that this could often, this could go ahead and lead to things like reinstating divisions or reinstating differences within the prison in and of itself, right? We tell you side opening government falls out on all these accounts because they don't tell you as to who funds this religious faith-based rehabilitation and all the other things, right? But look at what we bring from our side of the house, right? We necessarily, like, Risha has rebutted their point on how counseling is important, right? Like, we do agree to the point that counseling is important. The best way to resolve the unavailability of counseling in status quo is to pump in more funding, right? It's not that you go to religious counseling as the only alternative, because we've necessarily shown to you the incentive that these religious counselors have in order to expand the kind of consumer base that they have. At this point, we clearly shown to you that the kind of counseling that they have could be exploitative in nature in and of itself, right? We tell you religious counseling is not the only alternative that exists to conventional counseling, right? So at that point, having said this, Risha has okay. Before that, I'll take a point from closing.
I really don't see why it would be mutually exclusive. I'm pretty sure people can pick and choose what rehabilitation programs they want. Even religions themselves have an incentive to let people choose because they don't want to feel like an imposition on people.
Well, panel, look at the kind of characterization you get from our side, right? We are talking about prisoners, and Risha has necessarily talked to you about the kind of hostile environments they are in, the kind of vulnerable position they are in, right? We tell you these are like vote banks for these religious organizations, as in how they could, make their follower base stronger and increase the kind of followers that they have in the first place. And we don't necessarily see why these religious organizations won't take this advantage in the first place, right? So what have we brought you in this debate, right? We've necessarily shown to you how, because this is something that is funded by the state in and of itself, majoritarian narratives will exist, majoritarian ideologies will be shoved down the throats of people. Next, we do tell you that the kind of like in the presence of multiple religions, there will always be a clash in the kind of narrative that exists, that is pushed by the variety of faiths that do exist, and how these people can now go ahead and take aggressive measures to make their voice felt in the first place. And we've also shown to you how this reinstates differences based on faith in like within the cells, and why this is problematic in such hostile environments in the first place. And most importantly, we've shown to you how this leads to a diversion of resources, time, and efforts away from things that actually hold the spirit of rehabilitation up. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Speaker, for that speech. I would now like to invite, and for concluding the opening half, I would now like to begin the closing half by inviting the member of government to continue the case for side government. Hear, hear.
Hello. Is it okay if I rely on the timer and the?
Yeah, totally fine. Totally fine. Totally fine.
Please send POIs in the chat. Thank you. Okay. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. For many believers, their religion is the foundation of their moral and ethical universe. And opposition has to explain to us how, for these people, talking to them about morality, talking to them about rehabilitation, without talking about their faith, is a viable means to reintegrate them into society. I'll discuss, well, 3 broad things. 1, I'll respond to the previous speaker and discuss why, in fact, there is going to be more resources upon our side because you can rely upon the powerful network of volunteerism which only churches can provide. Secondly, I'll discuss the method of rehabilitation and discuss why secular forms of rehabilitation can uniquely complement with these religious forms of rehabilitation by providing a basis for that moral universe to be built up. And finally, I'll talk about and explain in far greater detail than our opening what the value of community is to people who have been starved of interaction with the outside world for far too long. Before that, several responses towards the previous speakers. 1, on the idea of consent. The idea that individuals are going to be very vulnerable and therefore will be coerced to change their religions, I think fails under if you assume that religions are rational. Because if you assume religions are irrational and have the incentive to collect more believers and more followers, then I don't think they will get that amount of, they will get far more followers or believers if they try to convert people who really do not want to believe or who are members of other religions. Most probably, they will be targeted to individuals who are unsure about their faith or who are believers but don't really practice it that much, right? And that's important because as our opening said, any form of rehab is coercive, right? But moreover, a certain level of coercion is justified because they have committed crimes. They are in prison. It is an inherently coercive activity. Therefore, since it's not incredibly coercive, since there's an inherent incentive for religions to market towards those who are predisposed to believe, and because rehab is generally coercive anyway, I don't think that's a big concern. But finally, I'll go one step further and say, even if individuals are going to be massively reduced, are going to be, have their choices constrained, right? And are choosing because they feel slightly coerced by the emotional support they're being given. I think that for a prisoner, all of your choices are heavily constrained, right? And therefore, choosing one choice, which is going towards this religion, amongst the few other choices you have, it still is an expression of your agency, still is an expression of your freedom, right? There is no inherently right or wrong answer to what your religion is. And because somebody asked me to and they were convincing and charismatic is a good enough answer, I think, to allow individuals to do so. So that's our response to consent. Next is our response towards the idea of the separation of church and state. So I think there's a misunderstanding here, right? The separation of church and state is based upon the principle that the state ought not to mandate a religion. And I think the other side tries to squirrel its way to saying, oh, this is clearly the state mandating a new religion, right? But again, assuming the premise of a rational church, like they are not going to market themselves to individuals who massively do not want to convert to their religion, right? What this means is these churches are likely to appeal only to those who are predisposed to their faith and probably to believers already. But even if churches don't want to do that, the state knows it's ineffective and therefore will not subsidize that form of activity. So I think that the state here is not coercing individuals to change their faith very much, because the state's only mediating and allowing for the church to reach people they already wanted to reach anyway and who are already probably predisposed to change their religion. Anyway, there's no imposition of faith in this scenario, and therefore the separation of church and state is largely respected. But even if that's not true, I think that in general society, the state allows the church to do activities which the state cannot do, such as providing spiritual and emotional healing towards citizens, right? And therefore, if you can prove that there's a unique benefit towards our side, then the separation of church and state can be void in this instance due to a greater good. Okay, so my case, right? Number one, about funding and the previous speaker. So I think uniquely, churches have a large network of volunteers who are probably going to be willing to work for very low or for free. Why is this so? One, because they can support people like priests or lay ministers who are going to be funded by donations from churches to go out and outreach and reach these individuals. The state does not have to pay them, right? Secondly, these individuals are highly motivated because they believe it is literally virtuous for them to do so. It is increasing their worth in the eyes of God for them to do so, so the state does not have to provide them financial incentives, right? So what this means is, so their churches are going to do it for free. They're going to probably have the funds to pay for themselves. And therefore, the state can actually have a larger amount of individuals working in these areas without having to largely financially support these individuals and these churches. Comparatively, I think that, like, because of the fact, comparatively, I think that several state programs are often consistent, right? Like, there can suddenly be a new governor in town who believes it's very tough on crime, and a 6-year program of rehabilitation could suddenly end, right? Comparatively, a church is far more consistent because literally their policies and their directives tend to last for like hundreds of years, right? They tend to be very, very consistent and very, very slow to change, and therefore far more consistent. So under this level, I think we've proven that there's probably going to be more funding and more individual support and resources for our program. Next. How come these programs are complementary, secular and religious? I have several reasons. One, because it gives you a foundational reason to work to be better. I think that any other reason the state can provide will not work if you do not believe fundamentally that I have to care about others and I have to improve myself as a person. But because religion is fundamentally irrational, it can provide that starting point of saying that you have to take a leap of faith just because. You have to try to be better just because, right? And that's very, very important, no thank you, because otherwise it's going to be impossible for individuals to even start on the process of secular rehabilitation. Secondly, I think that it helps make your life easier, right? And individuals who are happier and more socially active are probably going to be more receptive towards therapy because it gives you a sense of purpose in your life, right? Finally, we think that it's going to create competition. Like the different forms of industry and different forms of rehabilitation are going to try and have their own approaches towards talking to these people, and it's going to be far more effective when they can interact in that way. So that proves to us that it's very, very likely that these programs can interact, and they have to prove to us why they're mutually exclusive. Finally, I want to mechanize my community is so important to these individuals, right? So the thing about prison is that it cuts you off from a shared experience from every other person who is outside of your community, right? Because literally 10 or 20 years will pass and society will change around you and your relatives will not be able to see you, right? That means that you're cut off. The unique thing about religion is it provides a starting point for you to have social interactions with others. Because now I am suddenly able to have a means of connecting with you, even though I don't know who you are. This has benefits because, one, you can go to any church, not just your local one, in case you want to leave. But two, it means that churches who are likely to be very much focused on forgiveness and acceptance are likely to accept you. And in societies where recidivism is very, very high, involvement in community is oftentimes the largest way to make people feel like they don't have to depend upon themselves. They can ask other people for help and they can be able to reach out for that support, something which does not happen with solely individualistic and secular forms of rehabilitation. For all these reasons, I'm very, very proud to take this debate.
Thank you very much, Speaker, for that speech. I would now like to invite the member of opposition to continue the closing half case for side opposition. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Okay. Just give me 10 seconds to recollect my thoughts. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1, start. So, what we are going to talk about here is we'll first explain to you why religious based rehabilitation won't work, or there will be actually like a very limited benefits, and we will give you the alternatives and we'll prove to you why they work, and then we'll also provide to you some of the exclusive harms of faith based rehabilitation. So, first of all, I'll explain to you why the faith-based rehabilitation doesn't work and what is the alternative that we provide. The opening operation comes up and says that we will teach them like employment and like skill-based rehabilitation and all that, and we agree to it. And we would also like to state that we'll like implement a like rehabilitation where criminals are taught to respect and fear the current state laws and rather than going to the religious laws, and we'll explain why that is actually more beneficial. So what happens when you implement a faith-based rehabilitation, what happens is that most people won't feel connected to a faith-based rehabilitation, unlike what the government says. That's basically for many reasons. First of all, most of the people who come to like who commit such crimes aren't like generally inclined to so generally aren't so religious because their moral and legal barriers have already been broken, and in general religious people are more likely to be aware of that aware that the, that the, of these boundaries, that there are certain bad things like and they shouldn't do. So what happens that those people who generally commit those crimes, they aren't that likely to be that religious. So faith-based rehabilitation simply they won't be able to connect to them. Also what happens is that because obviously the opening operation talked about the funds and there's only going to be like limited number of counselors, so obviously you can't provide for like every religion. And also what happens, there are many different sects in the religion and they teach very different teachings. For example, in Islam itself there is a Shia and Sunni, and there are other sects also. So often there are many interpretations, there are many religious teachings of different sects. So what happens is that people of one sect or in a religion itself also can't relate to teachings of another sect. So what happens is that most of the people won't even like won't feel actually connected, and and obviously there is a rising number of atheists, so they won't actually feel connected to any religion. So that's why they are less likely to like be more actively involved, or they'll just like hear it for the sake of hearing and they won't actually gain any benefit from it. So that's why faith-based rehabilitation isn't that effective. Now okay, before moving on, I'd like to take any POIs. Okay, seeing none, I'll continue. Now I'll talk about why I believe that like creating a fear and respect in the present law and order is
Recognize that OG's case.
I'll take it later. So I'll take the POI later. So now I'll continue. So what I was saying that I'll now prove to you why creating fear and respect in the present law and order is more effective. So what happens, as I've explained, why most people won't actually be interested in religion, all faith-based. Also, what happens is that the most of the teachings in the faith-based rehabilitation are anachronistic, like they occur from like all the religious teachers and them, they are present in another time in another society, and different social contracts existed at that time, and today the society has evolved a lot into like different forms. So what will happen when you like counsel them in such a way that you create the law and order for creating a sense of fear and respect for the present law and order, It has numerous benefits. Why? Because the criminals, like the criminals live in that particular society before they committed the crime. They can relate more to that, and they know the, obviously they know the laws and orders, like they know the particular society, and they can feel they can definitely feel more connected. So when you counsel them without a faith base, saying why committing a specific crime is good or bad, sorry, why committing a specific crime is bad, and explain them according to how it will, like how it impacts the current society, then actually criminals are more likely to be like connect to them, and that's what can make them feel actually guilty, because faith based like rehabilitation simply won't work. Now I'll also provide to you what is the exclusive harm. The opening opposition somewhat stress upon it and how it can result in conversions. I'll explain how that will happen, and this will also counter most of like closing government's points. So what happens is that, suppose there are like, I have explained to you why in majority of the cases the faith-based rehabilitation won't work. Now on which set of people will faith-based rehabilitation work? So those people are generally like more likely to be weak-minded, and they are more likely to be like fearing prison, and like they won't, like there are very few people and they are generally not as strong-minded. So what happens, first of all, obviously the alternative, which is creating law and fear of law and order, will actually work on them, because they are more sensitive and they'll understand better like why it is important. But what happens when you practice faith-based rehabilitation? They are the religious teachers, as somewhat said, like the religious teachers, because they have an incentive like to convert more people into their religion, as the opening of government also said that atheism is on the rise and due to other things. So these religious leaders have an incentive to convert those people. And what happens that, because these people are generally weak minded, and due to the like conditions of the prison and their mental state in that prison is not very good, so what happens that these religious leaders take advantages of these like criminals who are like very sensitive. And it seems that these criminals like make an informed or choice, but actually they don't have a choice. It's just that the religious leaders just are taking advantage of their mental state, and they're using them to convert them into their religion. So that's the exclusive harm which we provide. Very, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Speaker, for that speech. I would now like to invite the government whip to conclude the case for side government. Here.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'll start in a few seconds then.
Sure.
CG does not have to prove why religion will work for all people, just that it works for some of them and that it is a valid option for them. So we support faith-based rehabilitation as a tool in the toolbox of many other tools we have. So a couple of clarifications. The first is there will obviously be many different religions who want to get more followers because they know that they want people to join them. They know they want more members. So likely multiple different religions will want to compete with each other to actually get people to join religion in the first place. So it's unlikely to only be the majority religion, but a diversity of religions on our side. But two, it will obviously be optional. One is because of fiat. But even if you don't believe that, I think there's an incentive for religions not to be so impository, meaning they won't like it if the followers are forced into that because they won't want to join. They won't be devout followers. They won't really care. They'll feel forced into it. But two, there's likely going to be backlash. Many people in society support freedom of religion. There are many civil unions groups who don't like that. Therefore, they will want to fight against these policies in the future. So likely it's going to be an optional policy of many different religions because reasonably people will not like that, especially those same minority religions you want to protect. Lastly, I want to point out that there was no response from CEO to the argument about funding. We told you that religions operate for free because of the volunteerist nature of these organizations. The fact that I think in the long term means they support sustainable policies that last for decades, if not centuries. Meanwhile, political capital is fickle. One mayor might have completely different opinions from the next and might want to defund these polices to be tough on crime because they don't believe people deserve respect. That means opposition has to defend a world where the funding goes up and down and up and down, and they can't create sustainable policies, they can't create long-term commitments and effective ways of therapy because these people disappear from the prison year after year when there's a new election. They have not engaged with that, and therefore they cannot have a comparative of always having therapists and counselors when we've proven that they're likely not to be sustainable. So two issues here. The first is what happens in prison, but secondly, what happens after they leave prison. So first, what happens in prison? CO says that religious people wouldn't have committed crimes in the first place, and therefore it's not effective. I have three responses. The first reason is that's not true. Not everyone is so devout and literally follows commandments to the exact same degree, meaning some people only go to church on Sundays, maybe don't really believe, and therefore can disobey and disagree with the teachings of the religion itself. Two, even people with a good moral compass still sometimes commit crimes. Think of people who were pushed from poverty out of desperation to steal from their neighbor because they literally had no other option but to feed their family. That means even if you're a good person, you made the decision to sin and to do a bad thing because there were other circumstances that were more important than your morality. But three, our policy is not just for religious people. It's also for people unsure of their faith, people who might have been atheists in the past. Reasonably, this is one of the darkest moments of your life. Likely, you'll want to look to a variety of options to help redeem yourself, to help find salvation. Even as an atheist, you might consider going to religion in the first place. So likely, even atheists can choose to opt in to this policy. The shared idea of opposition bent is that religions will take advantage of you. They will coerce you into doing these things because you're in a dark moment of your life. I have three responses. The first is that's the same for all other alternatives. If you choose to teach them a new skill, that's coercion. If you make them go to therapy, that's also coercion. We gave the response that some level of coercion is necessary and is effective. Remember, you literally force these people to leave their families and houses and to go to prison. That is coercion. So you have agreed that there is justification to somewhat coerce these people to do certain things because they have committed crimes against the state, crimes against their fellow people, and therefore it is justified to coerce them to change their behavior to some extent. So coercion can be okay in this instance. Like for example, we coerce our kids to follow laws, we coerce people to cross the street when the light goes on. That's okay to coerce people for the greater good. But secondly, to the extent that it is coerced, we are not absolutely coercing these people, meaning they can pick amongst a variety of choices as to what practice they want to opt into. So even if your choices are constrained, we are providing you one more option within your constrained set of choices. So before you could only choose between books and exercising. Now you can choose between those two things and religion. The choice actually becomes more valid because you can choose between different things. So lastly, they say that priests will try to convert you to strong ideas and radical beliefs. Couple of responses. The first is I don't see the harm. There's no bad thing about being a strong believer or a devout believer, and there's no such thing as objective counseling because counseling is inherently subjective. It's dependent on your individual personality and circumstance, so that's not a real harm. But it's unlikely for it to be radical beliefs because you're literally in a state facility. The police are right there. The guards are right there. If you were inciting terrorism, they will catch you. That is illegal. We already banned that. The last harm opposition gives us is one on divisions, that there are different sects, people will fight against each other. I have two responses. The first is, what is the comparative? I argue if people can't find solace through these other therapy programs, that means on their side they will still be isolated. And when people are isolated, that's when they join the worst gangs, the worst forms of communities to find support, who encourage bad behavior because these groups exist in multiple prisons, because there is no avenue for people to find solace except for these in some instances. That means if people don't find a rehabilitation practice to be effective, they might end up joining one of these terrible groups and they have to defend that comparative. But two, it's unlikely because religions teach tolerance. They have an incentive to want to be nice to other religions because they don't want to alienate people from that religion. So it's likely that they'll still teach values of religious tolerance and being nice to other people because that's something that they want. I will take the POI from opening opposition.
On your altruistic point on funding, we get that there is a great barrier that these church-going volunteers have to cross in order to go and work in these hostile environments which house criminals. Why do you think these volunteers will be ready to do so? And even if they do so, don't you think it's a great burden to put on these people?
If you're religious, then religion is the defining factor of your life. So you are willing to make sacrifice through these things. And they don't see it as a burden. They think they are doing God's will and doing a good thing. So they likely enjoy doing these things in the first place. we say that what we give you from CG that didn't come from OG is the mechanism, right? We didn't just say community, we explained how it works. The value of forgiveness, that you can believe how you get better. The fact that any other secular form of rehabilitation requires the emotional and not logical belief that you want to be better, that can only be given by the spiritual and emotional nature of religion. And people are likely to relate to them because religions can pick who goes there. Like in a black community, you can have a black priest, for example. These people literally study how to talk to people, how to be understanding, so they're likely to be believed in society. This mechanism was only given by CG and not by OG. But the second question is what happens after you leave? And OOSS will teach you life skills. But it's not enough to just have life skills, but you also need to feel that your life is worth living and feel that your life actually matters. That only happens when you have other people to rely on, support networks that only exist in religion. Remember, when you're in prison, you're deprived of all social interactions. And when you're out, you're completely isolated. We give you a support network, people you can still talk to, people you can still rely on, and that helps stop recidivism because these people finally have friends and do not feel so isolated that they are willing to go back into crime in the first place. Ultimately, we are better, not just for reformation, but proving the impact of why it's better post you're in prison when you'll finally have support networks that will be able to exist regardless of what happens to you as a person. For all of these reasons, CG wins the round.
Thank you very much, Speaker, for that speech. I would now like to invite the opposition whip to conclude the case for opposition as well as the debate. Here.
Okay, so am I audible clearly?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, so I will take the POI from the chat box only, and I am okay. So I will start with 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, start. So first of all, let me tell you that the whole case which the opening government or the closing government also talked is not exclusive to their paradigm. So it's like you are saying you are giving them an option to opt out. When you say this, that you are giving them an option to opt out, firstly you have to accept that most of the people would have a tendency to opt out of this. Only people who would be having a tendency to go to a religious teachers would be the people who might be very religious. Firstly, those people would be very less, as told by our member of opposition as well, when he said that if if the religious peoples have less tendency to be criminals, so such number of people would be less. But and on the other hand, those people who are not religious would surely be having an option to opt out, so they would surely opt out. And even in the present scenario, what is the exclusive thing was what they are trying to say is that they are just mediating the churches or the mosques to the prisoners, or so when you say that religions work for free and religions have a tendency to gain more followers, so you yourself contradict your whole case when you say that religions work for free. So when you are talking about funding, it's contradicted. And when you say that churches won't be willing, or the mosques won't be willing to reach out to those people, that is also contradictory when you say that religions have a tendency to gain more followers. Okay. And even then, when you are talking about mediation only, that is even not exclusive and is not impactful as well, because your whole case is based on relatability or the sentiments of the person that makes him religious and relate to the certain type of things. So see, if a state is allocating a mosque or a church to a person, is that effective, or is the status quo where a person who wants to learn religious principles can just go out to the mosque or the church or the temple, which is which he used to visit earlier, or on which he himself has more respect or more attachment, or for example, there are people who have family mosques, or the mosque where they have been going from their childhood or with the parents, so that would be more impactful and more attaching. So state does not even need a mediation, and even that mediation is going to be harmful and non-effective as well. Now coming to the certain rebuttals, and then I will summarize the case of member of opposition, our closing opposition, that how it is different from opening opposition. Firstly, coming to the rebuttals of the opening government, they said that criminals love religion more than the state. Firstly, that is a assumption, and if you say that criminals love the religion more than the state, and you are saying to promote it, then it is a very bad thing. We should be working in a direction where people fear the state laws and state code of conduct and love their country and people more than the religion. They should learn to respect and love their citizens more than their religion, because that also make them secular and inclusive to all the other people in the society. Like for example, if you are trying to promote this thing, like for example, you are saying that we should enhance the message that we should be loving religion more than the state, then it means you are not then there is a chance that those people might recommit those hatred or the crimes to the person who are not belonging to their community, because you are disrespecting the state and taking religion over the state. And now other thing, when we say that your paradigm is not going to be relatable to the person who are going to be rehabilitated, for that we have several points, like they won't be so much religious to feel attached, and the state might not allocate them to the right person of the same sect, or the right person who is having the same knowledge and relatability of the sect of the religion a specific person can relate to. Or there might be many atheists as well, and they might not even be able to teach them the way they want to be interpreted. And other thing is that persons might be having a tendency to disobey the religious leaders just because they are being allocated by the states, because these criminals have an inherent hatred towards the state. They have an inherent disobedience to the state, because they have done tortures, or they have put them in the jails and confined their whole life as well. And now one main point which we want to focus is that their whole paradigm of opening government as well as closing government is based on the inherent assumption that religion is always very good. It teaches you only moral things. It does not teach you hatred. It does not teach you discrimination, or it does not teach you the things that are actually illegal, because we can and it is false, because many of the religious practices are actually illegal. Like for example, in India, triple talaq is illegal, halala is illegal, sati pratha, which is a part of Hindu religion, is illegal. Caste system is inherently inherently very illegal practice. And since you are teaching them from the religion, that actually is not going to work, because religious code of conduct is different from state code of conduct. And when you are talking about state code of conduct, they might think that we should break these useless laws, because these useless state laws, because our religion teaches us differently, and even the state is talking about the religion only. Okay, now coming to our paradigm, in which we don't have these type of exclusive harms, and we teach them to fear state laws and have faith on state authorities, and that is going to be more effective. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I thank everyone for a lovely debate. You may digitally shake hands and leave the room. My panelists and I will discuss this debate and then get back to you hopefully in 15 minutes. Just one quick thing before you do leave. Could I just know this closing opposition speaking order?
I'm Akshat and I spoke.
From closing opposition.
Akshat spoke first, and who spoke second?
Vikhyat, I spoke second.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, thank you everyone. You may leave the breakout room and go to the main Zoom. We'll call you in like 15 minutes, hopefully. All right, thank you again.